I remember
You
the
have to look at
exact
this. It's
moment my
important.
scream shattered
What
the
is it? I
silence
don't
of that
understand.
It's
sterile
about your
hospital
condition.
room.
We need to act now.
It was not a scream of fear. It was not a scream of pain from any wound that could be seen by the human eye. It was something far more primal, far more devastating. It was the sound of a woman who had just discovered that everything she believed about her life, about love, about sacrifice, had been stripped away and rebuilt into something she could barely recognize. My hands were covered in blood. His blood. The blood of a man I had sworn to protect. A man whose last breath would carry a secret so heavy that my shoulders would bow beneath its weight for the rest of my days. And as I knelt there on that cold floor, surrounded by men in black suits who looked at me with a mixture of awe and suspicion, I understood something that would change me forever. Sometimes, the dying do not ask us to let them go. Sometimes, they ask us to carry them forward, to become vessels for their unfinished business, their unpaid debts, their desperate hopes. And when that dying man is one of the most powerful and feared figures in the Korean underworld, saying no is not an option. My name is Adaeze Chukwuemeka. I am 26 years old. I grew up in the Bronx, raised by a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night so I could study during the day. I graduated top of my nursing class. I had never been touched by a man in the way the romance novels described. I had never tasted alcohol or let my guard down long enough to fall in love. My mother called me her untouched flower. My friends called me boring. I called myself careful. But careful does not protect you when fate decides to throw you into the path of a storm named Kang Min-jun. Before I take you deeper into the story, I need you to do something for me. Wherever you are watching this from right now, drop your location in the comments. Let me know where in this beautiful world you are sitting, lying down, or standing as you listen to my story. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you are going to want to be here for what comes next. This is not just a story. This is a confession, a testimony, and a revelation all wrapped into one. Subscribe now because what I am about to tell you will stay with you long after this video ends. It was February when I arrived in Seoul. The cold was unlike anything I had experienced in New York. It was the kind of cold that did not just touch your skin but seemed to reach into your bones and make itself at home there. I had accepted a one-year nursing exchange program at Gangnam Severance Hospital, one of the most prestigious medical institutions in South Korea. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a chance to expand my skills, learn from some of the best medical professionals in the world, and experience a culture I had only seen in K-dramas my mother secretly watched on her phone during her lunch breaks. I was assigned to the VIP ward. In Korea, there is a different kind of medical care for those who can afford it. Private rooms that look more like luxury hotel suites, personal chefs, security details, and patients whose names you are told never to mention outside those walls. I learned quickly that money does not just buy comfort. It buys silence. During my first week, I was mostly invisible. A tall black woman with natural hair and an American accent, I drew stares wherever I went. Some curious, some hostile, some simply confused. The other nurses were polite but distant. The doctors barely acknowledged my presence. I ate my lunches alone in the stairwell, watching the city sparkle through the narrow windows, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. It was during my second week that I was assigned to room 1201. The head nurse, a severe woman named Baek Yoon-ji, pulled me aside that morning with an expression that was somehow both warning and challenge. "The patient in room 1201 is special," she said, her Korean precise and clipped. My language skills were still developing, but I understood every word. "He is a businessman. Very important. Very private. He has requested a nurse who does not speak much Korean. He does not want to be understood." I remember thinking how strange that request was. Why would a patient want a caregiver who could not fully communicate with him? But I was new, eager to prove myself, and in no position to ask questions. What I found when I entered that room changed the trajectory of my entire existence. He was sitting up in bed, though clearly it cost him great effort to do so. His face was gaunt, the bones prominent beneath skin that had taken on the grayish pallor I recognized from my training.
He was dying.
Whatever was killing him from the inside had already won, and both of us knew at the moment our eyes met. But those eyes… Even now, months later, I can close my own and see them perfectly. They were not the eyes of a dying man accepting his fate. They were the eyes of a predator, still calculating, still hunting, still dangerous. They were the color of aged whiskey, warm and deep and holding secrets that could destroy empires. "You are the American," he said in English, his accent thick but his pronunciation careful. "The black one." I should have been offended. I should have corrected him, reminded him that I had a name, that I was a person and not a category. But something in his gaze held me frozen. "Yes, sir. I am Nurse Chukwuemeka. I have been assigned to your care." He studied me for a long moment. I felt exposed in a way I had never experienced before, as if he was reading pages of my life that I had not yet written. "Chukwuemeka," he repeated slowly, testing each syllable. "What does it mean?" "It is Igbo," I explained, surprised by his interest. "It means God has dealt generously." Something shifted in his expression. Later, I would understand it was recognition, not of me, but of something within me that he had been searching for. "Perhaps God has," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "Perhaps God has indeed." His name was Kong Minjun, and I would learn in the days that followed that he was not simply a businessman. He was the undisputed leader of the Gwangmyeongpa, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in East Asia. For 4 decades, he had built an empire that stretched from the neon-lit streets of Seoul to the shadowy ports of Busan, from the gambling halls of Macau to the boardrooms of legitimate corporations that laundered money with the efficiency of industrial machines. He was a monster. At least, that is what the whispered conversations I overheard told me. A man who had ordered deaths with the casualness of ordering dinner. A man who had destroyed families, corrupted officials, and bent the law until it shattered. He was everything I had been raised to fear and despise. And yet, when I sat by his bedside during those long February nights, I saw something else. I saw a man haunted by ghosts he could not name. I saw regret etched into every line of his weathered face. I saw a father who kept a photograph of a young woman under his pillow and sometimes spoke to it when he thought no one was listening. The photograph was of a beautiful girl with deep brown skin and Korean features, an impossible combination that made my heart skip when I first glimpsed it. "Who is she?" I dared to ask one night, when the pain medications had loosened his tongue and the darkness had created a strange intimacy between us. He looked at me with those predator eyes, but the calculation was gone. In its place was something I had never expected to see in a man like him. Grief. "Her name was Ozioma," he said, and the name falling from his lips and his Korean accent was so unexpected, so impossible, that I felt the floor shift beneath me. "She was the only woman I ever loved. She was Nigerian, like your people." I sat down slowly, my professional composure crumbling. "She gave me a daughter," he continued, his voice cracking. "A daughter I have never met. A daughter I was too much of a coward to claim. And now I am dying, and my only child does not know I exist." The weight of what he was telling me pressed down on my chest. I should have remained professional. I should have offered platitudes and adjusted his fore and retreated to the safety of medical protocol. But something in his pain called to my own, and I found myself leaning closer. "Where is she? Your daughter?" He turned to look at me, and in that moment, I saw the truth crash into his eyes like a wave meeting shore. "I do not know," he admitted. "Ozioma died in childbirth. The child was taken by her family, hidden from me. They feared what I was. They were right to fear. But I have searched for 25 years, and I have found nothing but dead ends and cold trails." 25 years. The number echoed in my mind. I was 26 years old. The daughter he was describing would be almost exactly my age. It was a coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. But as I looked at the photograph again, at the woman with skin like midnight and eyes that held the same shape as the ones now staring at me from that hospital bed, I felt the first tremor of something that would eventually shake my entire world apart. The days that followed were a careful dance of duty and discovery. I performed my nursing responsibilities with precision, monitoring his vital signs, administering his medications, and documenting the slow but inevitable decline of his body. But in the spaces between medical tasks, something else was growing. Kang Min-jun began to talk. At first, it was fragments, scattered pieces of a life that seemed more like legend than reality. He told me about his childhood in the slums of Incheon, where hunger was a constant companion and violence was the only language that mattered. He told me about his rise through the criminal ranks, how he had started as a debt collector and ended as a king. He told me about the men he had killed, not with pride but with a strange, detached honesty that made his confessions all the more disturbing. But always, he returned to Ozioma. She had been a student at Seoul National University, he explained, one of the first African exchange students in the 1990s. She was studying economics, dreaming of returning to Nigeria to help build her nation's future. She was brilliant, ambitious, and possessed a beauty that had stopped him cold the first time he saw her in a marketplace, haggling over the price of apples with a vendor who had tried to cheat her. I was already a powerful man, he recalled, his voice softening in a way that seemed impossible for someone of his reputation. I had women who would have done anything for my attention. But Ozioma looked at me like I was nothing, like I was just another man in a city full of men. She did not fear me. She did not want anything for me. And that made me want her more than I had ever wanted anything. He had pursued her with the same relentless determination he applied to everything in his life. He learned her schedule, appeared wherever she went, and slowly wore down her resistance with a campaign of charm and persistence that any modern woman would recognize as problematic at best. But it was the 1990s and he was Kang Min-jun, and somehow, impossibly, she began to love him back. She saw something in me that I did not see in myself, he whispered. She believed I could be more than what I was. She made me want to be more. For her, I would have walked away from everything. The organization, the power, the money, all of it. But walking away from the Gwangyangpa was not something anyone did, and lived to tell about it. When his subordinates learned of his relationship with a foreign woman, they saw weakness. When his rivals learned of his intentions to leave, they saw opportunity. The woman he loved became a target. I sent her away to protect her, he said, and for the first time, I saw tears sliding down his hollowed cheeks. I gave her money, documents, and contacts in Lagos. I told her to disappear, to forget me, to build a new life. I did not know she was carrying my child. He learned of the pregnancy only after receiving news of her death. Complications during childbirth, they said. A tragedy in a country with limited medical resources, they said. But the child had survived, taken in by Ozioma's family, and hidden away from the dangerous man who had fathered her. They were protecting her, Min-jun acknowledged. They knew what I was. They knew the world would try to use her against me. So they erased her, gave her a new name, a new story, a new life. And I let them, because I knew they were right. But as death approached, his regret had grown too heavy to bear. I want to see her, he told me one evening, gripping my hand with surprising strength. Before I die, I want to look into her eyes and tell her I am sorry. I want her to know that her father loved her, even from a distance, even in silence. I should have told him that I was just a nurse, that finding a hidden person across continents was far beyond my capabilities. I should have offered comfort without commitment, the way we are trained to do with dying patients who ask for impossible things. But something kept me silent. Something about his story felt too close, too personal. The coincidences were piling up in ways I could not ignore. I called my mother that night, standing on the hospital rooftop with a cold Seoul wind cutting through my coat. "Mama," I said when she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." I heard her sit up, instantly alert. My mother had always been perceptive, able to sense trouble in the spaces between words. "What is it, Adaeze?" The question sat heavy on my tongue. I had never questioned my origins before. I knew my father had died before I was born. I knew he had come to America when I was an infant. I knew my mother's family in Nigeria had wanted nothing to do with us, for reasons she had never fully explained. "My father," I said slowly. "You told me he was Nigerian. You told me he died in an accident. Is that true? The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I counted my heartbeats, each one louder than the last. Where is this coming from? My mother finally asked, and I heard something in her voice I had never heard before. Fear. There is a patient here, I explained. He is dying, and he is looking for his daughter. A daughter he had with a Nigerian woman named Ozioma. A daughter who was hidden from him, who would be about my age now. The sound my mother made was not quite a sob, but it was close. It was the sound of secrets crumbling after decades of careful construction. Mama, I pressed, my own voice breaking. Tell me the truth. What followed was a confession that redrew the map of my entire existence. My mother was not my mother by blood. She was Ozioma's younger sister, Chukwuemeka, who had fled Nigeria with me when I was 6 months old. The family had created an elaborate deception to hide me from a man they believed would destroy me simply by claiming me as his own. My real name was not Adaeze Chukwuemeka. It was Kong Sumi, the name Ozioma had chosen for me before she died, a bridge between my two cultures that I had never known existed. I wanted to tell you, my mother, who is not my mother, sobbed. Every day I wanted to tell you, but I promised Ozioma on her deathbed that I would protect you. And protection meant lies. I am so sorry. I sank to my knees on that rooftop, the phone pressed against my ear, the cold seeping through my clothes until I could not tell where the ice ended and my skin began. Below me, the city sparkled with millions of lights, millions of lives, all of them more certain of their identities than I suddenly was of mine. The dying man in room 1201 was my father. The monster who had killed and corrupted and ruled through fear was my father. And he was asking me to fulfill his dying wish without knowing that I was the fulfillment itself. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something. Put yourself in my position for just a moment. You have just discovered that your entire life has been a carefully constructed lie. The man you were taught to fear, the criminal whose sins are countless, is the father who has spent 25 years searching for you. What would you do? Would you reveal yourself to him? Would you give him the peace he is seeking? Or would you let him die never knowing the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. I need to know that I am not alone in struggling with this impossible choice. The next few days were a blur of tears and phone calls and sleepless nights. My aunt, the woman I still thought of as my mother despite everything, flew to Seoul. We met in secret, away from the hospital, and she told me everything. She told me about Ozioma's brilliance and beauty, how she had been the pride of their family until she fell for a dangerous man. She told me about the pregnancy, hidden for months because Ozioma knew her family would never accept the father of her child. She told me about the complicated birth, how Ozioma had hemorrhaged and there was nothing the doctors could do. But she also told me something I had not expected. Before she died, she made me promise 2 things, my aunt said, holding my hands in hers. First, that I would protect you from his world, that you would never know violence, never know crime, never become what he was. And the second? I asked. My aunt's eyes filled with tears. She made me promise that if you ever found him, if fate somehow brought you together, I would not stand in the way. She said that every child deserves to know their father. Even a father like him. Did she love him? The question came out as a whisper. Even knowing what he was? She loved him completely, my aunt confirmed. And she believed that love could change him. She believed that you would be the one to finish what she started. I returned to the hospital that night carrying the weight of decades of secrets. I stood outside room 1201, my hand on the door, my heart pounding so loud I was certain he could hear it through the walls. Inside was a monster. Inside was my father. Inside was a dying man's last hope. I pushed open the door and stepped into my destiny. He was awake when I entered, those amber eyes tracking my movement across the room with the alertness of a man who had spent his life watching for threats. But there was something else in his gaze tonight, something I had not seen before. A kind of peaceful acceptance, as if he had already begun the process of letting go. You came back, he said simply. I was not sure you would. I took my usual seat beside his bed, but I did not reach for the blood pressure cuff or the thermometer. Tonight, medical procedures could wait. I need to tell you something, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Something that might change everything. He studied me with renewed interest, the predator surfacing once more. Speak freely, Nurse Chukwuemeka. I have too little time left for secrets. The irony of his words almost made me laugh. This man, whose entire life had been built on secrets, was asking for honesty. And I was about to give him the biggest truth of all. My mother, I started, then corrected myself. My aunt, the woman who raised me. Her name is Chukwuemeka. Her sister was Ozioma. The effect of those words was immediate and devastating. Kang Minjun went pale, what little color remained in his face draining away. His hands gripped the bedsheets with sudden ferocity. What are you saying? His voice was barely above a whisper. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photograph my aunt had given me. It showed a young woman with skin like midnight and features that were unmistakably my own. In her arms, she held a baby wrapped in a traditional Korean blanket. My real name is not Adaeze, I continued, tears beginning their slow descent down my cheeks. It is Sumi.
Kang Somi.
I am your daughter, and I have been standing beside you this entire time without either of us knowing. For a long moment, he simply stared at me. I watched emotions play across his face like clouds racing across the sky, too fast to identify individually, but collectively forming a storm. Disbelief, hope,
Joy. Grief.
they all fought for dominance until finally, one emerged victorious. Wonder. Sumi, he breathed, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch my face. When his fingers met my skin, I saw something break inside him. The walls he had built over a lifetime of violence and power crumbled in an instant, and what remained was simply a father touching his child for the first time. You have her eyes, he said, tears streaming freely now. Your mother's eyes. I would recognize them anywhere. What happened next was not planned or calculated or strategic. I simply fell forward into his arms, this dying monster, this broken king, this father I had never known, and I wept like the child I suddenly felt myself to be. He held me with surprising strength, his thin arms wrapping around me as if I might disappear if he loosened his grip. And he wept too, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his disease-ravaged body. I am sorry, he kept saying, the words repeated like a prayer. I am so sorry. For all of it. For sending her away. For not being there. For everything I have done that made me unworthy of ever meeting you. I did not tell him it was okay because it was not. I did not offer absolution because that was not mine to give. But I stayed in his arms, and I let him hold me, and in that moment, that was enough. When we finally separated, both of us spent from the emotional release, he looked at me with new eyes. They were the eyes of a man who had been given an impossible gift in his final days. There is something you must know, he said, his voice regaining some of its strength. Something that changes what I was going to ask of you. I nodded, waiting. When I learned that Ozioma had died, when I discovered that my child had been hidden from me, I made a decision. I changed my will. Everything I have built, everything I own, legitimate and otherwise, I left to my daughter. I hired investigators, lawyers, and accountants, all working to find you, all working to prepare for the day when you would be found. And if you were never found, everything would go to charity upon my death. He paused, coughing, and I automatically reached for water, bringing the glass to his lips. But I have enemies, he continued after drinking. Many enemies. There are those who have spent years maneuvering to take control of my organization when I die. They were counting on me dying without an heir. They have no idea you exist. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. What are you saying? I am saying that you are now the most valuable and the most endangered person in this country. If my enemies learn about you before you are protected, they will kill you. And if the organization learns about you without proper preparation, they will use you for their own purposes. This was not the reunion I had imagined. I had come to this room expecting a dying man's gratitude, perhaps some closure for both of us. Instead, I was being told that I had inherited a target on my back. "What was your dying wish?" I asked, remembering his earlier request. "Before you knew who I was, what were you going to ask me to do?" He smiled, and for the first time, I saw something other than regret in his expression. I saw cunning. "I was going to ask you to find my daughter and deliver a message. To tell her that her father loved her and wanted her to have a different life than he did. But now that you are here, my wish has changed." He reached for a button beside his bed, and within moments, the door opened. A young man entered, and my breath caught in my throat. He was beautiful in the way that the Korean media stars were beautiful, with sharp features and an intensity that seemed to fill the room. But there was something harder beneath the surface, something forged in the same fire that had created the man in the hospital bed. "This is Jong Hae-won," Minjun said. "He has been my second in command for the past 5 years. I trust him with my life, and more importantly, I trust him with yours." Hae-won's eyes met mine, and I saw surprise there, quickly masked by professional composure. "Sir?" he questioned, clearly confused by my presence and the intimacy it implied. "Hae-won, this is my daughter.
Gang So-mi.
The one we have been searching for. She has been here the entire time." I watched Hae-won process this information, his expression shifting through several stages before settling on something that looked almost like respect. "I see," he said simply. Then to me, "I am honored to meet you." "My dying wish is this," Minjun continued, drawing our attention back to him. "I want you to claim your birthright, Sumi. I want you to take control of everything I have built. And I want Hae-won to protect you while you do it." The room seemed to spin around me. Everything I had worked for, my nursing career, my simple dreams of helping people and living a quiet life, it was all being swept away by the current of this man's dying request. "I cannot lead a criminal organization," I protested. "I am a nurse. I save lives. I do not take them." My father smiled again, and this time, the cunning was mixed with something softer. "I am not asking you to become what I was. I am asking you to become what I could never be. I am asking you to transform the Gwangyangpa from the inside, to use its resources for good instead of evil. I am asking you to finish what your mother believed I could do." "That is impossible," I whispered. "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "But so is the daughter I never expected to meet sitting at my bedside as I die. The impossible has already happened, Sumi. Why not let it happen again?" Hae-won cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, there are others who will not accept this. Park Young-chul has been positioning himself for succession. He will not simply step aside for a woman he has never met, regardless of her blood." "I know," Minjun replied, his eyes hardening. "That is why we must move quickly. That is why my dying wish is not just for my daughter, but for you as well, Hae-won." He looked between us, and I saw the calculation returning to his gaze. "I want you to marry her. Before I die. In a ceremony that will be witnessed by the entire organization. I want her claim to be unquestionable." The word marry hit me like a physical blow. I stood up so quickly that my chair toppled backward. "No," I said, the word sharp and final. "You cannot be serious." "I am dying," Minjun replied, unmoved by my outburst. "I have perhaps a week left, maybe less. There is no time for courtship, no time for the traditional paths to power. A marriage to Hae-won will protect you in ways nothing else can. He is respected by the organization. He is feared by our enemies. And he is the only man I trust to keep you alive." I looked at Hae-won, this stranger I was being asked to bind myself to, and saw my own shock reflected in his eyes. Whatever he had expected when he walked into this room, it was not this. "Sir, he began, but Minjun cut him off. "You owe me your life, Hae-won. I took you from the streets when you were nothing. I made you everything you are today. This is not a request. It is my dying command." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I looked at my father, this man I had known for mere weeks, and felt the full weight of his legacy pressing down on me. He was asking me to sacrifice everything. my virginity, my freedom, my identity as I had known it. He was asking me to become someone new, someone I did not recognize. And the worst part was, I understood why. The wedding happened 3 days later. I remember standing in a room I did not recognize, wearing a traditional Korean hanbok that cost more than my yearly salary as a nurse. Women I had never met fussed over my hair and makeup, transforming me into someone who looked like a stranger in the mirror. My aunt stood in the corner, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. She had tried to talk me out of this, had spent hours arguing that my mother would never have wanted me to sacrifice myself this way. But I had made my decision. Ozioma believed he could change. I reminded her. She believed I could finish what she started. How can I walk away from that? But it was more than just honoring my mother's memory. In the days since my father's revelation, I had learned things about the Gwangyangpa that had shifted my perspective. Yes, they were criminals. Yes, they had done terrible things. But they were also the only thing standing between several vulnerable communities and complete exploitation by even worse predators. The organization ran protection rackets, but they also kept the worst of the drug traffickers out of poor neighborhoods. They engaged in fraud, but they also funded schools and hospitals that the government had abandoned. They were a complicated legacy, as gray as the man who had built them. And then there was Haewon. I had expected to hate him, or at least resent him. He was a tool of my forced compliance, a stranger who would have access to my life and my body simply because a dying man commanded it. But in the hours we spent together preparing for this unwanted union, I discovered something unexpected. He was kind. Not openly kind, not the way normal people were kind. His kindness was hidden beneath layers of professional detachment and trained caution. But I saw it in the way he made sure I had time alone when I needed it. I saw it in the way he explained the organization's structure, without condescension. I saw it in the way he looked at me when he thought I was not watching, with an expression that was not calculation or possession but something closer to concern. "You do not have to do this," he told me the night before the wedding, his voice low enough that the guards outside the door could not hear. "I will help you escape if you want. I will face the consequences." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than fear and obligation. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "You owe him your life. He made you." Haewon's jaw tightened. "He made me a lot of things. But I have the right to decide what kind of man I want to be. And forcing a woman into marriage is not something I am willing to have on my conscience." In that moment, I made a choice that would define everything that came after. "I am not doing this because I am forced," I told him. "I am doing this because I have spent my entire life being careful, being safe, being exactly what everyone expected me to be. And where has that gotten me? I ran away from my true identity only to be brought back to it by fate. Maybe this is where I am supposed to be. Maybe this is who I am supposed to become." Haewon studied me for a long moment. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," I admitted. "But I would rather be brave and foolish than spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had taken the risk." The wedding ceremony was held in a private compound outside Seoul, with only the highest-ranking members of the organization in attendance. My father was brought by ambulance, his hospital bed positioned at the front of the room so he could watch his daughter marry the man he had chosen for her. The ceremony itself was a blur of rituals I did not understand and words I could barely pronounce. But I remember the moment Haewon lifted my veil and looked into my eyes. I remember the surprise I saw there, as if he was seeing me for the first time. "I will protect you," he whispered, words meant only for me. "Whatever happens next, I will protect you." And then he kissed me. It was my first kiss, this joining of lips with a man I had known for less than a week, and I felt it all the way down to my toes. It was not romantic, not in the traditional sense, but it was real. It was the beginning of something neither of us had chosen, but both of us were committed to seeing through. My father died that night. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand, as his breathing grew shallow and his eyes lost their focus. But in his final moments, they found me one last time. "You are more than I deserved," he whispered. "More than I ever hoped for. Your mother would be proud." Then his hand went limp in mine, and Kang Minjun, monster and father, was gone. But the real battle was just beginning. Park Young-chul made his move within 24 hours of my father's death. He called a meeting of the organization's leadership, claiming that the deathbed marriage was invalid, that I was a fraud, that the true succession should go through him. Haewon and I attended that meeting together, walking into a room full of men who looked at me with contempt and hostility. I was everything they did not want in a leader: a woman, a foreigner, an outsider who had no history with their world. "She knows nothing of our ways," Young-chul declared, his voice dripping with disdain. "She is a nurse, a healer. What does she know of the business of power? She cannot even speak proper Korean." I stood there, absorbing the insults, feeling the weight of every skeptical stare. And then something shifted inside me. I thought of my mother, who had come to this country alone and made a life for herself against all odds. I thought of my aunt, who had sacrificed everything to protect me. I thought of my father, who had spent his last days hoping that I could become something better than what he had been. And I thought of myself, the careful girl from the Bronx who had always played it safe. It was time to stop playing it safe. "You are right," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "I do not know your ways. I do not have your history. I am exactly what you said: a nurse, a healer, a woman who does not belong in this room." The room went silent. Even Haewon looked at me with surprise. "But let me tell you what I do know," I continued, stepping forward. "I know that my father built this organization from nothing. I know that his blood runs in my veins, whether you accept it or not. And I know that the man who is challenging my right to be here was caught 3 months ago stealing from the organization's treasury." I looked directly at Young-chul, and I saw fear flash in his eyes. "Did you think my father did not know?" I asked softly. "Did you think he kept you around because he trusted you? He kept you around because he wanted to see what you would do. He kept you around as a test for me." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder, documents that Haewon had helped me gather, evidence of every crime Young-chul had committed against the organization. "This is my first act as leader of the Gwangyangpa," I announced. "Park Young-chul, you are stripped of your position and your protection. You have 24 hours to leave Seoul. If you are still here after that, I will demonstrate that I am indeed my father's daughter." The room erupted. Men who had been ready to dismiss me moments before were now looking at Young-chul with suspicion, and at me with something approaching respect. The plot twist no one had expected: the gentle nurse had claws. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Every day brought new challenges, new threats, new tests of my resolve. The organization was larger and more complex than I had imagined, with tendrils reaching into legitimate businesses, government offices, and international partnerships. Learning to navigate it was like learning a new language while running a marathon. But I was not alone. Haewon was beside me every step of the way, guiding me through the politics, protecting me from the dangers, and slowly, gradually, becoming something more than a forced husband. It happened so slowly that I almost did not notice it at first. The way his hand would find mine during stressful meetings. The way his eyes would soften when he looked at me across a room. The way he started sharing pieces of himself that he had never shared with anyone. "My real name is not Haewon," he told me one night, as we sat on the balcony of the compound that was now my home. "It is Choi Min-hyuk. My father sold me to a gang when I was 8 years old to pay off his gambling debts. Min-jun found me when I was 15, beaten and starving. He took me in, gave me a new name, a new purpose." I listened without interrupting, understanding that this confession was a gift of trust. "I hated him for years," Haewon continued. "Even as I served him, I hated him for seeing something in me that I did not want to acknowledge. He saw that I could be just as ruthless as he was. He saw the darkness in me and cultivated it." "But you are not like him," I said softly. He turned to look at me, and in the moonlight, I could see the struggle in his eyes. "I have done terrible things. Things that would make you hate me if you knew." I reached out and took his hand, feeling the scars on his knuckles, evidence of a violent past. "I do not need to know every detail of your past," I told him. "I only need to know who you want to be now, who you are choosing to be." Something changed in his expression. The walls he had built, the barriers that kept everyone at a distance, they began to crack. "I want to be the man you see when you look at me," he whispered. "I want to be worthy of the trust you have placed in me. I want to be more than what I was made to be." The first time we made love was that night, on our own terms, no longer because of dying wishes or political necessity, but because something real had grown between us. And when he held me in his arms afterward, I understood why my mother had believed that love could change even a monster. Love did not erase the past, but it could illuminate a different future. Under my leadership, the Gwangyangpa began to transform. It was slow, painful work, undoing decades of tradition and expectation. Not everyone supported the changes. There were challenges, betrayals, and more than one attempt on my life. But with each obstacle overcome, the organization evolved. We shifted away from the violent industries, reinvesting the profits into legitimate businesses. We established protocols that protected the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. We became something that was still powerful, still feared, but no longer purely parasitic. It was not redemption, not exactly. There was too much blood in the organization's history for that. But it was transformation, a turning towards something better. And then, on the anniversary of my father's death, Haewon presented me with a gift. "I have been working on this for months," he said, handing me a folder. I was not sure it was possible, but I finally found her. Inside the folder was information about a young woman in Lagos, Nigeria. My mother's family, the cousins and aunts I had never known. The connections I had lost when Aunt Kayamika fled with me to America. "I thought you might want to know them," Haewon explained. "To know where you truly come from." I wept then, holding the folder like a treasure. This man who had been assigned to protect me had instead learned to love me, and his love manifested in the most thoughtful gift I could have imagined. "I love you," I told him, the words coming easily, because they were true. "I love who you are becoming." He pulled me into his arms. "And I love who you have always been. Strong enough to see the good in a monster. Brave enough to become something no one expected. Beautiful in every way that matters." The scream that had shattered the silence of my father's hospital room felt like it belonged to another woman in another lifetime. The pain that had accompanied my unwilling transformation had become the birth pangs of a new existence. I had fulfilled a dying wish, but in doing so, I had discovered my own purpose. 2 years have passed since that night on the balcony. I am standing in the hospital where everything began, but this time, I am not wearing scrubs. I am wearing a designer suit, and the people who pass me in the hallway greet me with respect and a touch of awe. Nurse Chukwuemeka is gone. In her place is Kang Soo-mi, wife of Jong Haewon, and the woman who has transformed one of Korea's most notorious criminal organizations into something that confuses everyone who tries to categorize it. We still operate in the shadows, but the shadows have shifted. The schools we fund are legitimate now. The hospitals we support save lives without strings attached. The protection we offer comes with education and opportunity instead of threats and violence. Not everyone approves. The purists in the organization think I have made us weak. The law enforcement agencies that once hunted us do not know what to make of our new direction. And the rival organizations see our transformation as an opportunity for attack. But we're still standing, still strong, still feared, though now the fear is mixed with something else. Something that looks almost like hope. Haewon appears beside me, his hand finding mine with the ease of long practice. "Are you ready?" he asks. I look through the window into the nursery, at the rows of newborns wrapped in their blankets, each one a miracle of possibility. "Almost," I reply. The nurse inside spots us and smiles, walking toward the window with a bundle in her arms. She turns the baby so we can see, and my heart stops. A girl, our daughter, born 3 days ago, healthy and perfect and already possessing her father's intense gaze and her grandmother's midnight skin. "Have you decided on a name?" Haewon asks softly. I nod, pressing my hand against the glass. "Ozioma," I whisper. "Ozioma Haewon Kang. She will carry both worlds in her name, just as she carries both worlds in her blood." Haewon wraps his arm around my shoulders, And together we stand there, watching our daughter sleep, dreaming of the life we will give her. A life without secrets. A life without lies. A life where she will know exactly who she is and where she comes from. The dying wish of a monster has become the living legacy of a family. And I, the careful girl from the Bronx who never took risks, have become something I never imagined. A mother. A leader. A woman who screamed in pain and emerged transformed. If you have made it to the end of the story, I need you to understand something. You did not just watch a video. You walked beside me through the darkest and brightest moments of my existence. You witnessed my pain, my fear, my transformation, and my joy. The least you can do is hit that subscribe button and share the story with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe they are facing their own impossible choice right now. Maybe they are standing at the door of a room that will change everything. Maybe they need to know that on the other side of pain, there can be purpose. Share this story. Subscribe to this channel. And never forget that sometimes the dying wishes of complicated people can lead us exactly where we need to be. This is Kong Sumi, once known as Adaeze Chukwuemeka, signing off. My mother was right about one thing. God has dealt generously. And now, perhaps, so have I.